Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Paul Adamson. I'm the chairman of Forum Europe, and I'll be moderating this next session, which is called Strategic Autonomy and the Case for Global Partnerships. And we have a fabulous panel to prosecute this discussion for the next hour or so. Maria Manuel Leitão Marques, a member of the European Parliament from Portugal, attached to the Socialist and Democratic Group. Casper Klinger, Vice President of European Government Affairs at Microsoft. Leo Baumann, head of the EU Representative Office of Nokia, and Carl Pill, who's head of European Affairs at Eriksson. I'm not sure how many of you, hi everybody, have been able to listen or watch some of the discussions so far, but I think it's been extremely interesting, and it shows that the politicians, the MEPs, know as much about the topic as the policymakers and the regulators. So watch out, everybody, never mind the industry speakers. I think it'd be useful, maybe if we can, in very broad terms, try and frame this discussion, although an hour is maybe not enough time to do it justice. In terms of, to what extent do we have on the panel a common understanding, maybe not a definition, but a common understanding of what strategic autonomy means? To what extent do we have an agreement on how realistic, how feasible that strategic autonomy might be? And then if there is some kind of consensus on that, what are the steps? Do we have a consensus or some common understanding about what steps need to be taken in order to arrive at this strategic autonomy? These are the kind of the broad themes we're going to maybe address now, and each panelist will have between 5 and 7 minutes to give opening remarks. As always, you watching us, I think almost 300 people out there in outer space. You'd be very encouraged to welcome to have your questions, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat function, and we'll do our best to address them. If there aren't any questions, no problem, because we have lots and lots to talk about. So enough from me as a moderator, and it gives me very, very great pleasure to welcome Maria and to invite you to give your opening remarks. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to Forum Europe for this invitation to discuss so important issues. Strategic autonomy, such a buzzword nowadays. What does it mean? Is it a lonely Europe acting alone and without regard for other countries? No, of course not. That is not only contrary to European interests, it's also impossible to do in today's world. But we also cannot carry on as before. We cannot be as dependent on other countries, on other regions of the world for our security, not even if those countries are allies. We cannot rely on a single supplier of or cluster for essential supplies such as medical equipment or medicines, and we saw that during this crisis. So, strategic autonomy is the ability to stand in today's world without being forced to a certain position due to a lack of alternatives. It's the ability to decide our own destiny in coordination with our partners, with our allies, but without limiting the choices of Europeans. Now, what does this mean in digital realm? The digital transition has been radically transforming our lives and our societies, even more so after the pandemic hit. Digital tools are reshaping the world, defining new power balances and leadership, generating new opportunities, but also creating risks to individuals, businesses, and society. And this is happening in a very interconnected way. There are no borders on the internet, and data can be moved around in seconds. As with every transformation, we need politics and policies to frame it. And we need to ensure that those policies can, in fact, be implemented and enforced. This is a place where strategic autonomy comes. We need the right condition to be able to broaden our possible policy paths. From data collection and storage to online markets and platforms, it is important to ensure we can control some basic tools and rules about its function. A concept that's intimately linked with this discussion on autonomy is, of course, digital sovereignty. It's not total decision autonomy or exclusive control over the necessary resource and infrastructure. Also, nowadays, political sovereignty is different from the concept that Jean Baudin invented in the 16th century. Digital sovereignty may not require all digital technology to be European, but it does require the control of some strategic areas along the digital value chain. And what are these areas? The control of our data, a European data space and its own ability to encrypt data and to use them is crucial. The way we organize, access and use data also must be citizen-centered and respect freedoms and guarantees. And also sovereignty requires the control of information processing and transfer. And for all this to happen, we need a strong capacity for digital research and transfer the results of the research into innovation. And this means to invest more in digital skills, also very specialized digital skills, so that we can be ready in a well-funded scientific system in terms of resources, both material and human. And finally, also, we need to promote cyber defense and cyber security. And these two things are very important, both for political and digital sovereignty. So, European digital strategic autonomy, a lot of buzzwords together, should mean we have a plan to stimulate our digital single market, take advantage of the large amount of the data generated by our people and by our business, our governments, our companies, and innovate not only in lab and startups, but also beyond it. This requires a commitment in euros and human capital. But where do global partnerships come in? Around the globe, governments and companies are facing and trying to adapt themselves to this challenge. This is most often based on distinct principles, values, and cultures, resulting in dissimilar paths and different tools from China to West. However, with the digital transition happening at global scale, and with a deep interconnection between policy choices, no single nation or political body is able to shape digital transition alone. Besides, regulation will be more effective if coordinated globally. There are some countries which understood this is a while ago and are already trying to influence discussion, such as West and China, that have different views on digital society, even if West vision nowadays it's more closer of our vision. It's moved closer to ours in some areas. However, if the European Union wants to be able to choose its digital way of life, it cannot do it alone. It must search allies across the world. These allies must be aligned with European values and principles for a digital transition, upholding fundamental rights, protecting consumers, and contributing to a sustainable development. And we are trying to do that with these two proposals we are discussing now in the Parliament, DSA and DMA. We can look at the GDPR as the use case of Brussels effect. The adoption of GDPR has spurred other countries in many regions of the world to follow a truly global trend that includes Chile, Brazil, Kenya, India, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, and even California. It's a clear example of the ability of the European Union to be global standard setter for the regulation in digital economy. However, we should not be too happy about being just the referee of the global digital competition. We must be players too. As discussed before, only with the European players and value shares we can exercise our sovereignty and be fully autonomous and players also in cybersecurity matters. These players should compete globally with other players, both in European Union and foreign markets. So, to sum up, strategic autonomy is not rejection of partners. On the contrary, sometimes we need partners to achieve it. Concerning digital regulation, this needs to be done from the policy design phase onwards in order to get better results for all the countries and regions involved. Moreover, this kind of alliance should not be limited to governments and parliaments. We need to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach, including the public and the private sector, academia, and non-governmental organizations, as well as include citizens' perspectives as a key to legitimize the digital policies and promote bridges between civil societies worldwide. It's an idea that is present in the program of the Portuguese presidency of the Council through the Lisbon Declaration on Digital Democracy, with a purpose to be signed by governments, companies, academia, NGOs, and maybe citizens organizations in a big conference that Portuguese president is organizing for the next June. As the president's motto says, now it's time to deliver. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now it's time to deliver. Indeed, you covered so much ground there, so much to talk about. I have so many questions for you as well, but I will bite my tongue and wait for the discussion after the final panelists have spoken. I now turn to Casper. Casper, over to you, sir.
Well, thanks very much, Paul, and thank you to Forum Europe for the invitation. In many ways, I'll try and keep this introduction short and base it on what Maria already said. And I think whether you look at the terminology around strategic autonomy or the digital sovereignty discussion that Maria also mentioned, I think it's fair to say, of course, there are different versions of this if you look across Europe. There are some versions that are perhaps a bit more inward-looking, a bit more focused on how Europe can create a specific set of opportunities for the ecosystem, and perhaps even some versions of it that is looking a little bit on making it more difficult for external actors to operate in Europe. And then there are what I would say, other versions of it, which has much more to do with protecting, I think, the European legacy of open markets, making sure that the opportunities are still around. I think fundamentally, we have to also, as an industry, acknowledge and recognize that these are legitimate and very valid political discussions happening at a time where technology, where digitalization is having an enormous impact on all of us as individuals. We don't have to spend too much time on focusing on our response to the global pandemic, but I would also look at sort of the strategic competition, geopolitics of technologies today is fundamental as we see economies grow, as we see job creation across the world. So I think the starting point is for all of us to say there are good reasons why Europe is focused on autonomy. There are good reasons why Europe is focusing on really benefiting from a digital age where technology is going to be enormously important. I do think, and many of us probably read the op-ed by President Macron just before the New Year's, sort of focusing on the autonomy, the aspect of being able to take decisions unilaterally. And I think this sort of rule-based approach to the sovereignty discussion and the autonomy discussion is, of course, an area that is close to where we come from, really making sure that Europe has the ability to set the rules, set the direction of where Europe wants to head. Also basis on the basis of the values, the traditions, democratic values that Maria mentioned before. So I think fundamentally that is the starting point also for a technology player like Microsoft. I guess we have to understand and acknowledge that it's not Europe that is going to change on the basis of the technologies that we develop. It is us that needs to align and adapt to what is happening in Europe. And for us, that means technology fit for Europe, and perhaps paying even more attention to the concerns and the interest of where Europe wants to head. And that's certainly a direction that we're taking quite seriously on our side. What I would say on the sovereignty discussion is we're now into the second year of the European Commission, and you almost lose your breath when you look at the regulatory agenda coming forward in the next 12 to 18 months. I don't think there was anything unnatural about it. The Commission is really up to full speed, and when you look at the digital area, you have literally a ton of different regulations now coming forward on everything from regulating the data economy, Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act that Maria also mentioned, but also in areas like sustainability, critical infrastructure, focus on cybersecurity. There are a ton of new regulations coming forward. And in many ways, you could argue that this is the operational arm of the sovereignty discussion, where Europe and the European Union is trying to set the guardrails around technology, how that will be taken forward. And I think Maria mentioned the Brussels effect, the ability of Europe not only to set the rules for Europe, but in fact also being the leading ahead of the curve in actually also influencing the rest of the world in the regulatory framework. And I think for us as a company, we understand that if we get it right in Europe, if we're able to find ways of supporting Europe's digital aspirations, there is a very big likelihood that model will also be utilized in other parts of the world. And as was mentioned previously, I think the digital sovereignty discussion might be very present in Europe right now, but I don't think it's unique in Europe. I think we're seeing similar discussions happening in India, in Brazil, Southeast Asia. And in many ways, I think that the ultimate way of looking at this is, who doesn't want digital sovereignty? I'm a European, I work for a US technology company, but I completely get why it is that there is such a big focus on making sure that you can take your own decisions and that you're able to frame the approach forward. I think when we look at where Europe is sitting, of course, we like the rules-based approach. We also acknowledge that we actually want more rules because that will help shape our approach, including in some pretty difficult and complex areas. I think the Digital Services Act is a good example of where Europe is really taking a step forward to dealing with illegal content in a way that will put significant obligations on behalf of on platforms and technology companies, and quite a natural way forward. I also wanted to point to the Gaia X project, which is, I'm sure everybody on the panel and everybody listening is following this with interest, which is basically the vision to create a timely, state-of-the-art cloud solution in Europe based on sustainability. But I think the way of looking at the Gaia X project is also an attempt to try and define an open marketplace that is interoperable, where consumers will be able to choose between cloud providers in a more easy way. We've been supportive on the Gaia X project from day one. We're a member of the Gaia X Foundation, but needless to say, our approach is also based on making sure that our technology, the latest state-of-the-art hyperscale cloud solutions, will continue to be an important part of our support to Europe. We've been here for decades. We support literally millions of the small and medium-sized enterprises. We don't compete with our customers. We try and provide a critical infrastructure for them to reap the full benefits of the digital age. So what I'm trying to say is, of course, that we hope that Europe will continue also in an era with a lot of focus on sovereignty, to make sure that it doesn't matter where you come from, but rather whether you adhere to the rule sets that Europe is taking forward. And that will be the guiding lines, if you like, on how we're able to take this forward. Just before finishing up, I wanted to touch a little bit on the data aspect of this, because I do think that in many ways, Europe has been in the forefront also on the sovereignty discussion, if you go all the way back to the Westphalian Peace, been adapting that to a changing world. And in many ways, I think if Europe can get it right on the sovereignty discussion, I think Europe will also have the Brussels effect in defining how in a 21st century world where technology is connecting us in unprecedented ways, that we can get this right with the autonomy, the ability to set the right guardrails, and at the same time using the full potential of a data-driven economy where the exchange of data is going to be enormously important regardless of what area and what sector you're involved in. And I think one of the difficulties on the data discussion will of course be the big focus on data residency. Where do you store data? I think aspects of that will also have to focus a bit on how you process data, and also how those data will continue to be an important part of a global economy. And I think one of the aspects, if you look at the industrial data discussion taking place in Europe right now, I think that discussion will pick up pace again at a later stage. It's such a fundamental importance to understand that European industrial data is in fact global industrial data. It is important for both small and medium-sized enterprises as well as the big enterprises in Europe to continue to have access and transfer data between the different parts of the world. So I think that's one of the aspects that we're hoping to see will come out of the discussions here. The last thing I just want to mention before handing over to the next panelist is the importance of the transatlantic relationship. We have, I think, renewed enthusiasm. We have a new administration coming in the US, an administration that has focused very much on the role of Europe, reaching out to Europe and saying that partnership will be a key element of the Biden administration. And similarly, we saw the European Commission before Christmas coming forward with a proposal for a new EU-US global agenda. There are parts of that is devoted to technology and digitalization. And I think it really identifies some of the key challenges we have ahead of us. But it's also sort of a love letter from Brussels to the transition team in Washington. And I think we should put a lot of effort in making sure that all of us will contribute to really reestablishing, if you like, a very close partnership between two continents that share in such a fundamental way the same values and the same approach to global challenges. So I think with a full understanding where the sovereignty discussion in Europe is going, acknowledging that we have to adapt to Europe, not the other way around, I would just add that we think and we will certainly do our part to make sure that the transatlantic relationship will be an important part also of the sovereignty discussion. Let me stop here to begin with. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you very much, Casper. Very rich and very fluent contribution there. Again, many questions on my side, but I will hold back and give the floor now to Leo Bowman. Leo, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks for inviting me. Open strategic autonomy, technological sovereignty. Many important people have already issued statements in that respect. Of course, today at your conference, but also President Macron, this has been mentioned by Casper already. Commission President von der Leyen has said that the EU must have mastery and ownership of key technologies in Europe. Commissioner Breton has said that we have to be less dependent on others. And Angela Merkel has said that it is very important that Europe enjoys technological sovereignty, particularly in areas such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and also in securing a trustworthy data infrastructure. We have heard from the Portuguese presidency also that these terms are likely to be explored further in the upcoming meetings of the EU Competitiveness Council and also the European Council. But what is also interesting is to be part of the discussions around these terms in trade associations. And I would like to particularly mention the European Roundtable for Industry, because they represent businesses of all sectors that are headquartered in Europe. And also Digital Europe is interesting because it's the true ICT association at European level. And of course, my views are a little bit inspired by these discussions. They are also inspired by the discussions that we have at Nokia. But I would like to stress that what I'm going to say, these are my personal views. And I like mostly to make 4 points. And that is point number 1, that the EU should formulate a positive vision for an innovative and competitive Europe. And policy frameworks and investment strategies should be built accordingly. So addressing skills, addressing R&D investments, and many things have been mentioned already there. The second point is that we have to develop a culture of resilience and develop our capabilities where it is most needed. And that today is the digital domain. And that includes connectivity, of course, 5G, 6G, fiber, but also submarine networks, because they are strategic. And it's quite interesting that Portuguese Ambassador Brito has stressed this point this morning, and I'm happy to elaborate a bit more later in the discussion. And then not to forget, of course, cloud, edge cloud, communication platforms, data analytics, AI, software, cybersecurity, and semiconductors. But where is the link now between strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty and global collaboration? We have to stress, I think it's very important that we're clear about it, that we don't want protectionism. This has nothing to do with protectionism. We stand for open markets, and we want fair and balanced trade, rules-based trade. And we need international collaboration, as it has been pointed out already. We need to avoid fragmentation, especially in the networked economy, which thrives on the basis of standards, and I mean technology standards and interconnectivity. And we want people to sell their innovative solutions in Europe. We want to develop solutions together with all players around this world. And in fact, we want, of course, bright minds and actors from third countries to come to Europe to invest and innovate here together with us, together with European headquartered companies. And we want to standardize the most innovative technology solutions in Europe to be used then also by the global markets. But, and here comes the but, we have to, of course, assess our weaknesses, our dependencies, the risks. We have to study possible future crisis scenarios, and we have to address the risks that are related to those. And I would say this is normal, especially in digital technologies, but also, for instance, in pharmaceuticals. And Europe needs to make an informed decision on how we position ourselves in order to secure our access to raw materials, the high-tech know-how, and the manufacturing capabilities. We have seen from the current crisis, from COVID, that global supply chains can be disrupted, and there can be a tendency in other countries to give preference to themselves before helping or supplying or collaborating with others. And as it has stressed, tech sovereignty does not mean self-sufficiency. We don't need to be able to make everything ourselves, and we can't be in the lead everywhere. But it means playing a role where it really matters and managing dependencies in critical areas in a way that we can avoid total dependency. And this can be done, of course, by ensuring that we have some top tech know-how and capabilities in critical areas in Europe, but also through the diversification of our supply, and more importantly, also by ensuring interdependencies, so that we make sure that we keep a foot in the door so it can't be easily closed with the EU left out. And a good example here comes actually from this morning. You may have read also in Politico this morning that the French Institut Montaigne has issued a paper about semiconductors. So you know that the chip design capabilities nowadays are mostly in the US, and the manufacturing is done in Taiwan. And you have also strong players in Korea and Japan. But you still need the Dutch firm ASML to print on tiny circuit boards. And you also need the UK headquartered firm ARMS Technology. So this expresses a bit that we still have a foot in the door. We still have leadership in some key domains that make others also depend on European technology. And there are very interesting discussions around that now, for example, with the NVIDIA planned takeover of ARM. And for instance, Peter Mandelson intervening with the Commission and asking, should this be in the European interest? Don't we have to be careful that we kind of be out of the game here? Generally, of course, this will have an impact on our competitiveness, but as it has been stressed also by Maria and others, it has an impact on our independence, on our self-determination. And we should keep the ability, of course, to set the rules according to our fundamental rights and values. Eva Medel has said this morning that we have to have players in Europe. We can't just be the referee. And I would add, it is unlikely that others in this world will still accept us as referee or rule maker if we are not also in the game with good players any longer. And to illustrate that a little bit, you could say COVID, Europe has been key in developing vaccines and has decided to share the vaccine with everybody in Europe, but also with others. But how would it have been if only another country would have developed COVID vaccines outside of Europe? Would they have shared them with us in the same way? That's an open question. Also, if we have nothing anymore, if we would have no developments in AI technology, artificial intelligence, how could we tell others that we want a human-centric approach? Not easy. And also, a point where I slightly disagree with Casper is also, sometimes it may matter where you are coming from. For instance, otherwise you could depend on export control rules of other countries. So this is perhaps a slight point where we differ. And one point I would like to also say is that we have kind of moved on in Europe. We're still discussing these terms, but related initiatives have already been launched. And I would just like to name a few. There is the Foreign Direct Investment Screening Regulation. So this helps to gather intelligence and to intervene in exceptional cases where there's a clear risk of losing control of strategic assets. There is the EU White Paper on Foreign Subsidies, which is supposed to reinforce the trade defense instruments if foreign subsidies have distortive effects on the EU single market. You will also note that in free trade agreements the EU is signing with other countries, they are now implementing a reciprocity clause, which is very important. And also, wherever the Commission presents the Digital Europe program, the investment program, it mentions that one of the key objectives of this program is Europe's tech sovereignty.
Right.
So also,
you have to.
I think
yes, you could possibly wind up, Leo.
Yes, that's basically it. The other point I wanted to make is just that, it's not new for Europe to focus on what really matters, but we can elaborate that a bit later, because I thought of parallels with the coal and steel union, coal and steel communities, and also the common agricultural policy. But I would like to stop there.
Yeah, that may be required at the conference, but let's leave all that for whatever discussion time we have afterwards, Leo. Carl, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation and for having suggested this important topic. I hope you can hear me well. Maybe first to echo what MEP Leitao Marques alluded to here, that this debate really has many different names. We talk about strategic autonomy, technical sovereignty, digital sovereignty, but now more lately open strategic autonomy, and which in my book at least seems to be more related to trade, actually, as I believe it was Phil Hogan, the former trade commissioner, who coined it. Eriksson is, a fully European company, but at the same time a truly global company with more than actually 80% of sales outside of Europe and more than 99% outside of our home market, which is Sweden. So open access to the global market, but also international cooperation and global partnerships is and has been absolutely fundamental for us. And what has enabled our growth over these last 140 years of existence and placed us now at the helm of 5G leadership here has notably been open and fair trade, I must say, even though the situation, of course, changes in geopolitically turbulent times. So what I'm trying to say is essentially that there should not be a contradiction between strategic autonomy and free trade, and it seems that we have an agreement on this panel here. Competition on free markets is good for innovation, and that's what's keeping us sharp. But of course, it needs to be on a fair market with a leveled playing field. And of course, Europe shall nurture its own industries, but more providing the best possible environment and tools to do so. that will allow them to be even more competitive on the global market, not shutting ourselves into regionalized ecosystem. That would not be very good. So I think it's in this context where the current EU debate is sometimes a bit misplaced, perhaps, meaning that the focus should not be on having our own EU unique standards or 100% sourcing in Europe with only local supply chains and so forth. That is taking it too far and would be completely unpractical, not allowing us to build scale and flourish on the global marketplace. So that would actually be counterproductive to creating what we strive for, a competitive and resilient European economy that can contribute to Europe's industrial leadership in the world. I think one of the reasons why the whole debate around strategic autonomy came around in the first place is due to this anxiety about the implications of Europe's failure to this date to build European tech champions comparable in size to those that we see in the US and Asia. So what EU should focus on is to also see to what already exists on our continent and nurture that. We have today, believe it or not, 2 world-leading European vendors in 5G when we are both here on the panel. So from the sector we come from, focus should be to support the rollout of 5G here and now to allow for all the ensuing ecosystem and related industry to flourish. And also, as mentioned by Leo, Breton said it himself. He said secure 5G connectivity is an enabler for many other critical digital technologies we need to invest in, such as AI, processors, supercomputers. So the reason I think why Europe does not have any major tech players compared to what happened in US and Asia is that the continent has been late in the deployment of high-speed connectivity, which is a fundamental infrastructure upon which to build other innovations, services, applications. The US app economy, for example, which was built on 4G, managed to flourish because they were early adopters. And a bit the same situation is now happening in 5G, where industry applications will be the game changer. So I'm curious to know. I'm asking myself the question: would we have had this debate about developing our own tech capabilities / autonomy if Europe had taken greater advantage of the possibilities in 4 and 5G? I'm not sure. Leaving you with that open question. Thank you.
It's very concise, Carl. Thank you very much. We're now going to have a discussion with the panel and bring in some questions from the audience. I'm going to start with you, Maria. First of all, if you could maybe quickly answer a question from Wolfgang Papp, research fellow at CEPS, the think tank CEPS, which he says, should we not make a difference between autonomy and sovereignty? We shouldn't get bogged down too much maybe in semantics, but it does seem we use these 2 phrases a lot, almost interchangeably now, and this conference is a good example. Strategic autonomy on the one hand and digital sovereignty on the other. Are sovereignty and autonomy quite distinct concepts, and we should be careful about mixing the 2?
I think sovereignty's condition is a tool to be autonomous. Without sovereignty, go back to the political sovereignty. When the concept was invented by Jean Baudin, it means absolute sovereignty. It means the capacity of a state to decide by himself alone, without consider other allies, other people, other countries, in internal and external order. Now we have not this concept in political matters, but to be autonomous, we need some tools that allow us to decide by ourselves with independence. So they are different, but it's a condition. Sovereignty in digital matters means the condition to be autonomous, also referring that we are not completely autonomous. It's a relative concept nowadays. Okay. Also a remark, very important, on these submarine cables. I think it's a very important matter, and in the Portuguese presidency, we are going to put forward Ela Link, that is the cable between Europe and Latin America. But the idea is the connective Europe, the south of Atlantic, Europe, Latin America, and Africa together in a triangle.
Thank you, Maria. I have another question for you, but I want to use my question to you also to bring in the rest of the panel because it's addressed to them as well. But in a sense, you're wording my question for me, Maria, based on what you said in your introductory remarks. We were talking about how, since this session is about global partnerships, you said in your opening remarks that regulation would be more effective if it is coordinated globally. And then you went on to talk about, which everybody's talking about in this town in Brussels, the Brussels effect. And it's not clear in my mind 100% to what extent Europe just likes the idea of having its own rules, which then the rest of the world has to try and basically copy. And GDPR is always mentioned as the key example of that. Or to what extent should we have a bit more, we as Europeans have a bit more humility, and actually we put forward rules, but we are also very keen to have a discussion in global arenas. So what do you actually mean when you say we need to coordinate, but also there is this Brussels effect?
No. From my point of view, it can happen, the Brussels effect. They can copy us. They are not forbidden to copy us, but it's not my approach. I think we need to work together from the very beginning with other regions of the world, and I'm doing that with Latin America because they are thinking about they have the same concerns we have here in Europe because we have the same problems with digital world. So they are, for instance, Colombia, they are discussing, and Chile, they are discussing a lot about its own strategy for AI, and we can work together in order to have convergent principles on digital regulation and not necessarily export our regulation for the others.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on the panel like to respond?
And
to
also
that?
with the West, why not? With the new American administration.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
even before in OECD with the DPI. So.
Okay, Maria. Anybody else on the panel like to respond to that? Because I am generally intrigued from maybe an industry perspective how you see that, gentlemen. Should there be global? Should be some kind of coordination at a global level of standards, or do we, as we Europeans, we like the idea? In effect, we get there first, like GDPR, and then bit by bit, the rest of the world falls into place. Anybody? You're all being very quiet. Nobody wants to respond.
Well, in the telecom sector, we have an organization called the 3GPP, where over 700 industrial players are collaborating on finding new standards in the area of telecom, and that was what made, let's say, the advancements in 5G now being possible. So that already exists in our field. Okay.
Well, let's then move on to a question from the audience. Another question from Gerrit Steinfort, Manager, Government Regulatory Affairs at IBM. Question to all of you. Could open source become a more significant policy consideration in Europe in achieving autonomy, sovereignty, fostering more open technologies in Europe that can, for instance, also lead to more European or global alternatives, rather than being locked in with a few vendors and tech players, such as in cloud or 5G? Maybe an industry person first can go first. Who wants to respond to Gerrit? Casper, Carl, or Leo, over to you.
I can say a few words, Paul, if you want me to.
Yeah, please do, Casper.
I have a sense that you'll be upset with us if we don't say anything on this panel. So, I think that's a really good point, and I'm probably not too far away from my colleague from IBM in this area in saying that I think the good things about when you look at the Data Governance Act, and we'll see what comes out in the Data Act a little bit later this year, is that it both has a focus on making sure you set the traffic rules of how you utilize data in a responsible way. But I think the important part of this is that it also puts forward, I think, a pretty compelling argument about the importance of utilizing data and the fact that you can actually also create autonomy or sovereign opportunities, if you like, for the European industry by fully embracing the fact that it's not a question of whether it's nice to use data today and have data collaboration. It's a necessity if you want to be successful in a global competitive market. And I think that's actually striking the right balance in Europe. And it goes a little bit back to the question you had before, Paul, that Is it a goal in itself to create unilateral rules in Europe? No, I don't think so. But I do want to acknowledge that I think Europe is ahead of the curve on this and are taking steps that other parts of the world will, copy or get inspiration of afterwards. And I think that's admirable in one way, but I think also that, in fact, it raises the responsibility of Europe in getting this right, because we could see rippling effects of this also at a global stage. If you ask me as a representative from the industry, how we look at sort of the data space and the open collaboration space, I'm not sure that I have full top cover for my mothership in Redmond by saying this, but I think actually success of industries or success of companies will be dependent on the degree of openness and the fact that you can collaborate in taking your platforms, your technologies forward. So I think that is going to be a fundamental aspect of success for businesses, whether we can enter into partnerships and really facilitate a greater focus on open collaboration and the use of data.
I would like to chime in here as well, if I may.
Yeah.
Because open source is, of course, important, and it already plays a key role today. So it's absolutely not excluded from networked technologies. But on the other hand, these technologies are incredibly complex and require deep investments, specialized investments in R&D. We as Nokia, we invest more than 4 billion in research and development every year. And if you cannot then get a return on your investment, then the model doesn't work anymore. I mean, all that we are investing would not be invested in open source solutions. And we have a model that works very well as well, and that is the standardization model. It's as open, so everybody is free to contribute their technology solutions. And in the end, nobody is locked into a patent or into a standard. Everybody is free then to use those standardized solutions and under front terms. So nobody can be excluded, but they have to pay a certain license fee to those that have developed the technology. And that license fee is small, it's moderate, it's linked to the value that the technology provides to everybody else.
Okay, thank you. Carl, do you want to say anything before I move on?
No, I mean, I think Leo covered it pretty well. I mean, we come from the same background on open source. Of course, there's also, you see, as he alluded to, the IPR and licensing aspects. There's a system. I mean, if we take that away, who would be sort of who would be willing to innovate if there would not be any, if we would give everything away, openly. And then we also have, I think, security aspects, which tends to be overlooked sometimes as well when we talk about open source. But as Leo said, this is existing already. We have over 100 open interfaces in 3GPP today. So.
Okay. All right.
That's okay.
Thank you. Something that Casper said just now in his opening remarks, he quoting you correctly, I hope, Casper, correct me if I'm not. There are definitely, talking about the European Union, there are different versions of strategic autonomy across member states of the European Union. And I just wonder whether you all seem to be agreeing that strategic autonomy is important, it's legitimate, it's necessary, it's a good thing. But I just wonder to what extent the European countries which make up the European Union, it's not just institutions in Brussels, have a similar shared vision, frankly. Do you have it from an industry point of view? And I'll come to Maria in a second as a policymaker, as a politician. Do you have any concern that there's too much disparate versions of what we all mean by strategic autonomy and digital sovereignty? Gentlemen. That means you, gentlemen, on the top row.
Well, I guess that's part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not been clearly defined.
Maria, but 1 second.
Together.
I'll come to you in 2 seconds, Maria. And let's Carl say something.
Okay, let's
Carl has it, but he didn't take many minutes to opening remarks.
No, please.
Back to you, Carl.
No, I was just saying that that's one of the problems, I guess. I said that in the beginning. Many of these terms are being floated around, and no one really has defined what it really means. But I guess we will need to come to a point when this will be needed. But I saw that Casper was on mute here, so he was saying something.
Casper and then Maria. Casper, do you want to say something?
Now I had the opportunity to think a little bit more about that. And what I would say, I think actually one of the fundamental challenges we're facing in Europe is actually that not enough people are, investing and thinking hard about these issues. And the paradox in all of this is that, with Brexit, we have lost a country in Europe that has traditionally been among the more progressive countries when you look at sort of regulated technology and digitalization, has had a light touch approach to that regulatory agenda. That balance has moved a little bit into sort of the heartland of Europe, if you like. And I think the paradox in all of this is that the digital 9+ countries that have also traditionally been the advocates for, free competition, an open Europe that will benefit from collaboration using state-of-the-art technology, but they have been a little bit more quiet lately. I think there's been many other topics on the agenda. I do think we need all countries of the European Union, all 27 countries, to really focus on the impact of technology and also focusing on getting this new discussion right. Because I don't think it's insignificant if you go, south or north on this discussion. It will have real impacts on Europe's ability to collaborate. And interesting enough, I mentioned Gaia X before because I do think it's a very important initiative in Europe. I'm not trying to be provocative here, but I think if you go into many capitals around Europe and say, what is your opinion about Gaia X? I think actually in many places, a lot of people would say, come again. What is this initiative you mentioned before? Because it is not top of the agenda. And I think that's a problem. It's a mistake, not only because we would be advocating from our side, of course, for keeping Europe open, making sure that our technologies will also form part of a prospering Europe with a cost-effective hyperscale cloud being provided, but simply also because I think those discussions, it goes to the core of how Europe can get the strategic autonomy or the digital sovereignty discussion, right? So I think my sort of easy answer to that would be, we need to make sure that this discussion doesn't only happen in Brussels, doesn't only happen in the European Parliament, but in fact it becomes part of the public debate in capitals around Europe, whether it's Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, or Northern Europe.
Okay, Maria, you wanted to come in, Maria.
No, only some remarks. We start discussing about digital sovereignty before the crisis. We start discussing on the concept because we are discussing on AI, and especially because we are discussing on data. It's with the data and data strategy that we are discussing. We start discussing in February, January 2020 or before on the concept of digital sovereignty here in the Parliament. Without thinking in the crisis, it's because we want to protect and use our data. Strategic autonomy here in the Parliament, the discussion, maybe before, but we highlight this discussion within the crisis, because of the crisis and because of medicines and the masks and so on, about products related to the crisis. So it's different moments. That is, the concept of digital sovereignty comes before, and no relations with the crisis, even if the crisis can put it in the center. So okay, there are different moments. And I would like only to agree with Leo on this important point that I referred to, but he referred better than me, that we need European players. Not only regulation, but European players, not to exclude players from abroad, but we need strong European players. And the example of the vaccines is very, very important to understand this point. But also in digital world, we need European players in order to have to be sovereign.
Right. In order to round this up, everybody on the panel, I got a suggestion. Although Casper just said we shouldn't just have a discussion in the European Parliament, and earlier on, Marie did say we need to have a multi-stakeholder approach, which is fine. But as May just said, there are some very important dossiers now wending their way through the European Parliament: Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, all the data stuff, and so on and so on and so on. And so my question to the gentleman from the industry is to, as delicately and diplomatically as possible, as you like, but express any concerns or any things you would like the European Parliament to look out for as they start discussing in great depth these different digital sovereignty related dossiers. And I'll give Maria the final word so she can respond to either further alarm you or further reassure you about what the European Parliament will be doing in the months to come. So Leo, over to you. What do you think the Parliament should be mindful of as they discuss these various new dossiers when going through the committees?
I would say balance. I would say to adopt a balanced approach and to really look at what Casper has also said, what others say to define the terms of strategic autonomy and technological sovereignty, because ultimately the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. So it doesn't, maybe it's a bit a theoretical debate, but in the end, we have to have a dialogue on each single piece of new legislation and make sure that the balance is there. And I think, and that's where I wanted to compare this new situation with Europe's common agricultural policy, because back then, securing Europe's resilience in a key domain, which back then was food, is comparable to today, looking that we have the know-how in digital technologies, pharma, energy. Back then, it was to make Europe self-sufficient in food supply. So that's the little differentiation. It was not a protectionist measure, but it was to ensure that Europe would not need any imports. And that's the difference of today, where we don't need self-sufficiency, but we need to be in control of technology, what's going on. And for that, we should have the capability in critical areas to also innovate ourselves.
Thank you, Leo. Carl, over to you.
Yeah, sorry. No, I completely agree what Leo just said about the balance. I think it's very important that we strike a sensible middle ground here between still being open for business, but also demanding on our sort of trade partners that we are competing on equal terms. But also, I would like to that the Parliament and the policymakers acknowledge a bit more what capabilities and technologies and technology leaders are already existing in Europe. It seems that we have the tendency to always go on to the next and create the next Airbus of Europe in AI or in microprocessors or you name it, cloud. So we should also look, as I said, I think in my opening statement, to what leaderships we can nurture already here in Europe and that we can build further upon.
Thank you, Carl. Casper.
Yeah, we talk a lot about values and about the European tradition. I think in many ways what we're hoping is that the European Parliament will be sort of the gatekeepers of the very same values and the same areas. We understand that there will be rules coming our way. We embrace the fact that we need more rules also in the area that we operate. I think what will be essential for the European Parliament to ensure is that you have predictability on what you're required to do so that it's easier for the industry to live up to those requirements. So I think sort of fundamental aspects of rule of law, competitiveness will be what we will be looking for and hoping to partner up with the European Parliament around. And last but not least, making sure there is an interface between the industry and the work that is happening on the EU institution side.
Thank you, Casper. Well, Maria, you received some very well-intentioned advice from the industry there. So how do you respond? In about 1 minute, please.
No, it's very important to see that industry agree that we need regulation. It's a common, but what regulation, of course, balance, it's very important. It's not only to protect our rights, fundamental rights, it's also to guarantee interoperability, portability. It's very important articles in the MEA for my point of view, it's one of the most important is this point. And I totally agree that we need to invest in innovation. We need to invest in resilience of our systems, but we need to invest in innovation in order to that research network and the results of our research move to actionable innovation. And this is a very, very critical point for us. And also we are discussing in European Parliament about this point. Of course, we are keep the dialogue with industry as we did before in this phase of the discussion of the MEA and the SCA. And of course, at the end of the day, we need a balance and not only a balance. We need that this proposal, the SCA and the MEA, be effective in its results at the end of the day. If not, you are going to have a very good law in books, but a big gap between law in books and law in action. And this is not a good result. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Very wise words to finish on. We have to leave it there. My thanks to the audience for watching our very interesting debate, if I may say so. And of course, my thanks to our panel, Maria, Casper, Carl, and Leo. It's a wrap. We're going to have a lunch break now. You have to bring your own lunch, I'm afraid. And we reconvene in about 45 minutes. Thank you again, everybody, and especially to my wonderful panel. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Paul. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.